Hello, welcome to episode 158 of the Book Binge, where this week we're reviewing another classic and one that I think I'll be comparing at least a little bit to one I covered last month. That sentence had one too many twos in it, but that is fine. This week we're covering Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. It's actually not his more popular novel. War and Peace is, but considering he only wrote 3 full-length novels, this is the other one of his really popular novels. And this is coming nearly a year after I reviewed War and Peace, so if you haven't checked out that review, you can definitely do so if you are interested. I gotta say, these two books are going to appeal to very different people, broadly speaking. Of course, there's going to be a subset of people that really like both. I am one of those people, but if you're not necessarily super versed in much of classic literature, Russian literature, whatever you want to consider the general basis of where both War and Peace and Anna Karenina stand, they are very different novels, and like I said, are going to appeal to pretty different audiences. War and Peace is going to be one that is like one of the easiest classics that I think general epic fantasy fans are going to be able to get into. Anna Karenina is not that, we shall say. But let's talk about the actual book, starting off with the good. One of the things that I enjoyed the most about Anna Karenina, especially early on, were just the vibes. Tolstoy just has something about his writing, his general style, the way he tells a story, the way that he includes characters and writes about them, that just works for me. It's fun to read and experience, even if the content isn't really super active or interesting. This was one of the shining moments of War and Peace for me. I would say that War and Peace was a book that my favorite sections were actually the peace sections, the moments that were more related to family drama or character work in general, as opposed to like war or battle sequences or that kind of material. Anna Karenina shares this strength as far as characters are concerned, and in some sense could be considered a little bit easier to get into than War and Peace because there aren't as many names. I would say I actually had a little bit of a harder time with Anna Karenina getting into knowing which character is which, just because of doing it kind of 50-50 audio versus immersive, as opposed to War and Peace, which I just read. And as you know, if you do audio, if you don't see the way that names are spelled, sometimes it's confusing to differentiate who's who. At least that's how it feels for me. Either way, the first couple parts of Anna Karenina are just about getting invested in the world of the characters, getting invested in the writing, and the tone of the book really helps you to get into it. I would say part 1 is one of my favorite parts of the book, just because of the way that Tolstoy is able to build these things up. Another thing that Tolstoy really excels with in this book is the drama and relations. This is also something that if you have read War and Peace, you will recognize. Drama and general relationships between characters. Those don't have to be romantic, just any sort of relationship, whether that is romantic or just familial or even simple acquaintances or people who haven't met each other. The relations and the interactions between characters and the drama that unfolds in this book especially is super strong. There are romantic partnerships that make up the bulk of where this drama and relationship stuff plays out in Anna Karenina. That stuff is really good, but a lot of that is also strengthened by the familial drama that takes place as well. The balance between, the ones unfaithful and the ones with integrity and everything in between as far as character work goes is fun to follow and relatively easy to follow as well. You get a wide taste of the spectrum as far as people can be with these characters. Tolstoy also keeps you on your toes somehow and invested in everything, no matter which major group is being followed, because you do largely follow a couple primary storylines with specific characters associated with them, and then some characters that kind of flow between. And speaking of characters, characters are a great thing in Anna Karenina as well. This ties in with the previous point of drama and relationships, not just the interactions between the characters, but the characters themselves. Following the balance of people in the story is great. I compared the characters here to those in East of Eden while I was reading it, except it being kind of the opposite, where if you've watched my review of East of Eden, or any of the times where I've talked about either one of these two books in context of each other, I would say the characters of East of Eden are caricatures made human. I would say that Anna Karenina's characters are Humans made caricatures. Tolstoy paints living, breathing people, but also chooses to fit them into particular molds that make them easy to digest and to understand and to analyze as characters, we'll say, even though they are people. Comparatively, I'm going to make this point again, East of Eden's characters are more like Steinbeck took molds, took positions, you could say, that the characters were meant to fit in, took those and then made human characters from them. Tolstoy did the opposite. He took human characters and then fit them into a specific thing. And like, this isn't going to work for some people. We might talk about that a little bit later, but I thought that it was done very well overall, especially when the book wraps up. You kind of realize what those roles are and how it really fits into the thematic aspect of the story, which again we'll talk about here in just a bit. Foreshadowing in Anna Karenina is also pretty good. There are several accounts of very subtle foreshadowing that are very cool to realize once you've finished the book, because some of them don't really smack you in the face until like you've thought about the book for a little bit and then you realize, wait a minute, that is actually a really important point. I can't really specify any of these moments, obviously, because of spoilers. You can't really specify what is foreshadowing what if you're not talking spoilers, and I'm not going to talk about those in this review, but there is a circular nature of certain plot lines in the book that are really, really solid. But speaking on the themes, the thematic overtones and underpinnings of the story are really what make this book so good, beyond the balance of the dramatic aspects between the character relationships. What it means to be a person is a big part of it, but it is more importantly how to be a good person, because you get a lot of the drama, you get a lot of what Tolstoy is trying to say just kind of implied through the way that characters react to certain things and the way that they feel internally about those things. And the dichotomy between characters allows for some very poignant exploration here, especially in the end. Again, stuff that I can't really specify a whole ton because of spoilers, but there is a lot of good themes happening with the characters' journeys. As for the bad of Anna Karenina, because I think it is overall weaker than War and Peace, so there's a few things that I want to talk about here. The final part, part 8, could come off as being preachy in certain religious or philosophical ways. This could be considered a little bit similar to the way that Epilogue 2 of War and Peace was, but rest assured it's not anywhere near that bad, where Epilogue 2 was basically just a series of essays talking about some of the thematic points that Tolstoy was including in War and Peace. The part 8 of this book is actually a story portion. It just does have a lot of preachiness to it that some people might take a little bit of issue with. The main thing that I kind of found a little bit strange about it was because there was a self-insert, essentially. You learn that Levin as a character is more or less a self-insert of Tolstoy in a lot of ways, as far as the religious and philosophical points come around from beginning of the story to the end, but especially in part 8, a lot of the religious and philosophical agonizing that Levin goes through is kind of a self-insert on Tolstoy's part. This actually really makes the part 8 really effective in my personal view, but there are probably going to be some people who find part 8 rather dull, relatively speaking. The book is also pretty slow and plotting overall. There's not really a whole lot of actual plot stuff going on. Most of the plot is the character relationships and the drama that unfolds and that develops throughout the course of the novel. The novel itself isn't really about a story the way that, say, War and Peace is a story about characters through the war that is happening at the time that the story takes place. Anna Karenina is basically just about the characters and their relationships. There's not a whole lot of plot, so it is quite lengthy, and some people could consider it a little bit boring and dull as such. I know that there were some people who this book wasn't fully effective for because of this reason. I didn't really have a problem with it for the most part, but there are definitely some moments that, even if you are loving the book, might, drag just a tiny little bit. Like I said earlier, I personally also struggled a little bit more with differentiating characters in Anna Karenina than I did in, say, War and Peace, but I do think the general trend amongst the people who read this book alongside/before me is actually the opposite. I think most people had an easier time with characters in Anna Karenina on account of there being significantly less of them. So your mileage may vary there, but that's something that I struggled with a little bit more this go around. And to match the slow and plodding pace, One could argue Anna Karenina is a bit too long. You know, I kind of went on that there are certain sections that might drag on a little bit. This is a criticism that I think could be levied at Anna Karenina, you know, fairly, whereas I would say War and Peace, despite being, you know, a good bit longer than Anna Karenina, couldn't have the criticism of being too long put on it, because, you know, I think that book is actually a little bit too short. I mean, you could argue that Epilogue Part 2 doesn't need to be in there, but like that's kind of its own separate thing. As far as the actual story goes, War and Peace doesn't have any emptiness or anything that could be cut, whereas Anna Karenina is a little bit lengthy on account of it really just being about the characters. As for The Ugly, the strong focus on dramatic, romantically driven relationships and interactions is definitely going to be something that you should take into consideration before you try reading this book. If you are not somebody who is into that kind of thing at all, not even a little bit, this book isn't going to change your mind. Books like War and Peace take a major character focus, but even if you're not a character person, War and Peace is probably still going to be a good book for you. I think that book is going to work for a lot of people who are too scared to try it because it's too big, and trust me, that book is a lot easier to read than a lot of websites make it out to be. A lot of places put War and Peace on lists of like the hardest books to read, and it is not, I promise you, it's just long. Anna Karenina, comparatively, because of this strong focus on the drama and everything, is going to be a little bit harder for some other people to digest. Like I said, Anna Karenina and War and Peace are fundamentally different novels doing different things and are going to appeal to broadly different crowds. War and Peace is going to appeal to a lot more people than Anna Karenina is, so definitely take that into account. But really what it comes down to, even beyond the character drama itself, is that a lot of the character interactions throughout the book are going to lead to and affect the actions and tendencies and decisions and the way that people think throughout the novel in certain ways that some people may find sensitive content in some capacity. I can't say that any of this sensitive content is handled poorly, because it definitely wasn't, and I also can't really talk more specifically about a couple of these points because of huge spoilers. But yeah, there is some stuff that this book goes into that certain people might not necessarily be expecting until they get about halfway through and kind of realize what these characters are thinking inside their heads. Skip about 10 seconds ahead in this video if you don't want to hear the trigger warning that I have for this book. There is a slight trigger warning for self-harm and suicidal ideation in Anna Karenina if you're super sensitive, but that is as far into that as I will go. As for the recommendation of Anna Karenina, I would say give this one a try. Don't expect it to be another War and Peace, but if you really like Tolstoy's style, it doesn't hurt to give this one a shot, because the tone and the vibes of at least the first part alone are really, really good. But I think you should give it a try. This isn't going to work for everybody, but if you are interested in giving it a shot, don't be scared to just give it a shot. Tolstoy's style is intact, even if his focus is a little bit different, so I do recommend it on count of that. I mentioned earlier my comparison to East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I read about 60% of this book right after I read East of Eden, and doing that was actually really great for me. I think the dichotomy of the character work with somewhat similar thematic ideals was fun, and viewing them in the different ways they're constructed. I'd go so far as to say, if you want to read Anna Karenina, don't just read this book. Read East of Eden and Anna Karenina, whether in that order or together doesn't really matter to me, and think about how they are both so opposite and so closely related as far as characters go. It's really quite fascinating, or at the very least I had a great time thinking about it that way. But anyway, that is the review. Maybe I won't forget I reviewed this one, because yeah, when I was actually writing the notes for this review right here, I had to double check to make sure I did actually review War and Peace, because for some reason I don't remember recording that video at all. But that's all for this video. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you did, on Thursday I have something a little bit different. I'm going to be reviewing the very first manga that I've read since starting this channel. If you're into that kind of thing, I hope you're excited. If you're not, don't worry, it's not going to be a super regular thing, just every once in a while. So, you know, it's normal to skip a video from somebody every once in a while, even if you're a faithful viewer. If you are a faithful viewer, thank you. But yeah, I am going to be doing something a little bit different Thursday. Either way, thank you for watching this. I'll be back in the next video regardless.